Welcome to Convergence.fm. I'm your host, Ashok Shivanand.
People who are interested in a whole variety of things, they usually know better how to work with the information, how to validate the information, and how to define boundaries of what you want achieved well.
On the show, we explore how purpose-driven leaders align their culture, operations, and experimentation to de-risk the decisions that really matter and lead AI-enabled businesses with clarity. Convergence.fm. Transform from the inside out. We all love an underdog innovation story. It usually goes something like the Goliath team is able to apply more people, more systems, more budget to solve this problem and chase the innovation. Whereas the underdog, the David, looks at the problem differently and is able to solve the problem better and beat the Goliath with something that is better, faster, and cheaper. This is a kind of unfair advantage that we wish we had, we can instill in our teams and our companies. And here's a few examples. Toyota, for example, in the manufacturing space, when most of the traditional manufacturers were going about improving quality output by adding more systems, reports, quality control personnel, and approvals, Toyota, on the other hand, added an and-on system. Now, they delegated a lot of authority to the people on the lines where anyone who saw a problem could stop the line by pulling a cord. This seemed like it could be very risky and expensive, but instead ended up being a win that everyone else ended up copying because instead of trying to identify the quality issues, they eliminated the quality problems at the source. Another story I love from Toyota is in their retail and sales space, where a lot of people were more likely to buy cars when that moment happened at the test drive, when you hit the accelerator and you feel the power of the engine, when you get sucked into your seat. Now, what did Toyota do in parallel with building engines that had more horsepower and torque? In order to give you that feeling of getting sucked into your seat, they also made softer seats. Another example that you may have heard of is in space exploration. Astronauts couldn't use ballpoint pens in space because they relied on gravity. As the story goes, NASA spent millions of dollars inventing an anti-gravity pen. Not only could you use it in space, you could also use it underwater. You could use it to write upside down. And all the while, the Soviet cosmonauts, they brought a pencil. Now, I looked this up and the story doesn't quite pass the fact check test, but I think there's a reason we remember it. And something that I think is a common thread here is that whenever we're really narrow about framing the problem, we're prone to over-engineering. Whereas when we're able to zoom out and frame the problem, even as a contradiction, we're more likely to come up with simpler, more elegant, more sophisticated solutions. Good news is, our guest today, Ivan Gekht on Convergence.fm, who's a trained rocket scientist, is also an expert at the theory of inventive problem solving, or TRIZ, as it's called in the Soviet Union, where it's invented, as a result of studying tens of thousands of patents and looking at patterns in there. The framework talks about framing ideas as problems and contradictions so that it's easier to know when you're ready to start solving them and when it's solved. It talks about levels or stages of innovation that you can apply and what level you need to be applying proportional to the size of the problem or the opportunity that you're chasing after. And my favorite concept from here probably is how the most ideal systems are systems that no longer exist, despite their benefit or their outcome continuing to persist. Ivan and his team at Gehtsoft are a team of highly skilled software engineers, and they're called to solve problems in very unforgiving environments like high-frequency trading, financial market infrastructure, logistics optimization, and we get to hear a ton from this framework that Ivan has studied deeply, as well as stories from both the industry as well as Ivan and his team's experience, like how sometimes eliminating a database altogether can create a much more robust system that is faster, how they studied the flow of water in a labyrinth to help get drugs delivered in a much more reliable and high performant way in the pharmaceutical industry, and tips on how to use AI by framing contradictions as well as providing more domain context. If you're looking for intentional ways to fuel your team's problem solving or to gain momentum on your good ideas by intentionally killing the bad ones, this episode has an amazing framework as well as a ton of stories that I think are useful. Here's Ivan Gekht talking about TRIZ on Convergence.fm. Subscribe to the podcast to get future episodes as soon as they're published. If you find this helpful, give the podcast a 5-star rating on your podcast app or hit that like button on YouTube. Hey man, welcome to the show. I've been really excited to talk about TRIZ and some of that intersection of philosophy and systems thinking, which I've really enjoyed about your work.
Absolutely, yeah. I love TRIZ. It's been a huge part of my life ever since I studied it in the university. So I'm happy to dig a little bit deeper into that topic today.
Yeah, let's start with some definitions. TRIZ is what we're pronouncing, TRIZ. Yeah. And so what does it stand for? And what is some of the philosophy behind the style of innovation?
Yeah, absolutely. So TRIZ, or actually it's TIPS, Theory of Inventive Problem Solving. It actually was a way to answer questions like, are inventions for everyone? So actually, Russia in Soviet Union engineering school, one person noticed that out of I think 150,000 of research projects, only about 2% make it to actual implementation in 5 or more places. So it's like the airport where 1 out of 50 planes make it to the destination, which is insane, right? Amount of money, amount of effort that was going into that. So he posed the question, is there a way to make innovation more predictable? And they started a huge research project. His name was Genrich Altschuler. And as a result, they analyzed some crazy amount of different patents and innovations. And they actually found patterns that help them formalize and create kind of a process around the innovation to make it more predictable and to bring way better results than just the usual methods that a lot of us use, like trial and error, for example.
Yeah, something that I really like about this that is maybe a topic of debate is that now you've got a process for innovation. And there's certainly going to be a number of folks that I think are naysayers around the overlap of innovation and process. I personally happen to, I think, be on the TRIZ or TIPS side of the fence there, where I have seen time and time again where having some level of structure can be a very important constraint that drives creativity. It's something that even authors use. I forget who it was, Hemingway or whoever else said that, they write only when inspiration strikes them, and it strikes them every morning at 9 a.m. And so just the process of getting started and having some structure around it actually, I think, drives a lot more versus waiting for an idea to come to you and waiting for that aha. I'm making up a lot about TRIZ and TIPS, so maybe tell me a little bit about the process and how it's creates space for innovative ideas while at the same time maybe provide some level of predictability, maybe even efficiency to it.
Yeah, so basically what they created was a few things, right? So number one, how do you approach the innovation at all? So what they developed was a method of approaching it through resolving contradictions. And they actually didn't invent it, they took it from the evolution, right? So what is a contradiction? It's a statement. If we make something better, something within the system gets worse. Simplest example is, for example, you want to make something stronger, something made of steel. You want to make it stronger, bear more weight. How do you do that? You add more steel to it. So, but it increases the weight, right? So we increase the load-bearing capacity through the increase of the weight. So what if we want to avoid increasing the weight? This is a contradiction. How do we approach that? So you pose that as a question, and then you start working from that contradiction. So there are actually multiple laws, I would call it like nature's laws, that they develop of how systems evolve. Right. So once you start finding these patterns, you can now then take your system, look at it, define the pattern that it's currently fitting, and use that pattern to actually predict what the next step of the evolution for the system is. So it's a little bit complex, but I can give you example if you want. So one of the
Yeah. I would love that. I love this solving for contradictions.
yeah
I think it falls well in line of sort of those constraints breeding creativity versus being too open ended. And that also reminds me of another favorite quote of mine around. I think this one was Da Vinci, around how simplicity is the ultimate sophistication, and it's not necessarily something that's a trade-off. You can have both, in both simplicity as well as sophistication, but then it requires some level of smarts and some intentionality around how you get there. So please do share some
yeah
examples to help frame this for us.
Absolutely. So first of all, great example about Da Vinci. Actually, this is one of the methods that is being used in TRIZ. It's called trimming. So you actually cut down the things that are necessary instead of adding more and more complexity to it. But going back to the example, right? So how systems develop, right? So one of the ways that they've found out is systems evolve first by creating more and more complexity and flexibility. So you have more and more moving parts in it until it reaches certain level of complexity where it becomes too complex, and then usually it actually becomes a part of the super system, which is like an overarching system, and disappears. And that's, if we look at the evolution of the computers, that's exactly what happened. Because at first you didn't have operating systems in the way of sophistication that they are right now. So you had a lot of separate things coming in, drivers and this and that. But then you started to increase complexity, right? So we started to create programming languages instead of writing in the machine code. And then some of that became part of the operating system. And this is how a lot of this develops. So if you have a simple system which doesn't have a lot of moving parts, the next natural step of evolution is actually adding more flexibility in what's going to be configurable, what's going to be changeable, etc. And this is kind of the way you move through that.
So help me understand that statement there, where a system becomes more and more complex until it reaches a certain level of complexity where it becomes part of the super system. And I like that you jumped on the computers there. And so initially we had, call it, this even started the mainframe era, where we had the limited operating systems, the programming languages with punch cards took a long time. You had to be very specific. And then, so walk me through from there, maybe how things have evolved. And then I haven't fully understood what super system means either. So break that down for me as well.
Usually any kind of system does not exist in a vacuum. Right. So whatever we are looking at is always a part of something. And in this particular case, every part of the computer is a part of the system as a whole, the computer as a whole, right? And then every computer is a part of a bigger system, which is, let's say, internet here, right? So you can look at it in a whole variety of ways. So when you select a particular system, you start thinking about, okay, how can I make it better? Right. And by better, how do I resolve some of the contradictions? Right. So even as simple as a microphone. Right. So you and I have microphones. And without going into what's inside the microphone, one of the questions is the location of the microphone. Right. So I actually have a microphone arm, which allows me to actually move it in what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 4 different places to adjust it to be the best, right? But at certain point, this system becomes complex. Right now I have an arm, now I have 4 moving parts in it. It's becoming a little too much to produce, to manufacture, right? So the idea is to move into the idealistic state. What is the idealistic state? Ideal system is the system that does not exist, but everything that it needs actually happens. Everything that is needed of it actually happens. So what is the next logical thing is to make the arm disappear, right? So I need a microphone that can be placed anywhere, so it would work well. But the arm doesn't exist. And that's actually how we got the microphones that no longer have arm, like Bluetooth microphones, right? So you're no longer attached to anything, right? You can have it in your headphones as a microphone. So this is kind of the way that different systems can evolve.
Yeah, this is another principle I was excited to talk to you about. The ideal system is a system that doesn't exist, but produces the outcome of that system. Is that fair?
Yeah.
Is that how to say it? What are some more examples of that that would help me sort of feel more certain about my understanding about it?
One of the examples how we applied it in our history was a project we did for a company who needed to vendor historical prices. It was currency prices, and the historical prices went all the way down to the tick data. So what is a tick? It's one singular move of a price. At the very top hours of the market, the prices can move 60 times a second, or sometimes even more, right? So that's a lot of data if you look at the span of a year, 2 years, 10 years, for example. Originally, all the prices were stored in a database. Database is a great place to store things, but it has its own limitations in terms of speed, in terms of searchability, how the structure, how everything is organized. So we went through the concept of ideal system. How do we solve that, right? So we actually removed the database from the picture. We create a specific file storage. That whole intention of the existence of that very, very simplistic system was to store prices in the most efficient way. And then we were able to vendor these prices from that storage, which was, it had higher speed to find things, right? It had way lower requirements to the equipment where it was run, because it didn't have any of the overhead that the database would have. And yet the storage was there. There was ways how you can make sure that there are duplications and everything. So you have your reliability. And we went from there, and that the system worked very successfully for many, many years.
Yeah, I think I'm trying to think of some more day-to-day examples here as I try and understand this. You said it's called the ideal final results, right?
No, ideal system. Yeah, ideal system.
Ideal system. And so, yeah, I think I'm like, if we look at a doorknob and the door, it is there to kind of separate the inside from the outside. And it's useful. Optimizing it could be, having some level of automation to it. But then when the optimized state, my guess is, kind of like those sliding doors that use a motion sensor, where you can remove the door altogether from the system, making it most ideal. Is that kind of the understanding?
Yeah. So ideally, for example, right, there is a way that you encounter very often, especially up north, right? So when you enter a store, right, so you need to isolate the hot from the cold. So when you enter the store, you don't want the hot air rushing out, the cold air rushing in. So what they do right now is they have the blower that just blows air straight down, right? So instead of working on the insulation on the door itself, There is another system that's created to create that level of insulation.
I see. And then in this case, the system that doesn't exist, what's the thing that was taken away to confirm? It's the door, right?
It might not be the door. For example, in this particular case, you didn't take the entire system away, but you no longer need that heavy insulation on the door to protect from the warm air going out, because you have another part of the super system that actually takes care of that.
I think this is really fascinating, and there's a lot of benefits I can see where if you can have the functionality or the benefits of the system without the system itself, then it's going to likely be a much better user experience. If we don't see the system in play, it's likely going to be more efficient and cost effective to maintain and continue kind of modifying. So, what's something that maybe is a little bit more relatable, something that we all see in our day to day, where the system has been taken out, but we still get the benefits of the system, and it's a function of innovation.
Yeah. So, for example, let's look at the glass windshields, right? So right now, to keep the windshields clean, very often you can see the windshield wipers that are there as a whole system with a lot of moving parts to make sure that the glass stays clean. But if we look at some other examples like jets, especially fighter jets, they don't have windshield wipers. Don't they have the same issue? They do. You need to make sure that you can see through the window. But for example, in jets, the speed at which they fly creates a different effect, right? So it blows away everything. Or similar example can be there are different solutions on the market that you can apply on the glass that acts as a deterrent. So now you can help stay glass clean without actually having a windshield wiper, by just applying certain chemical elements to it and creating that deterrent layer.
And so in those cases, we don't have the best windshield wipers, one that doesn't exist anymore, because we're taking advantage of the fast speeds and other things that are going on with this jet. We're instead coating it with a very specific substance that makes sure that it achieves the function of the windshield wiper. And this is as opposed to kind of making a super complex windshield wiper that can work at high speeds and at low temperatures and all those other things, which could have taken, a whole bunch of different set of resources and time and energy and focus, instead of kind of zooming out and thinking about, now that you've achieved the functionality and you know that the functionality is beneficial, let's zoom out and see, hey, what are some other maybe more simple ways to get the same outcome without having to, go down this path of over engineering further. Yeah, I love this in so many ways.
Correct. So there are five levels of different problems that you can solve, right? So let's say
and this is in the TRIZ framework.
In the TRIZ framework,
identified five. Got it. Okay.
It's in the TRIZ framework, right? So, for example, you have an generator that vibrates, right? So we all know when electric generators work, they usually vibrate because there are some rotational forces inside of them. And you need to get rid of these vibrations, right? So level 1, okay, let's start with level 0. You put the generator on the ground somewhere where vibrations doesn't matter, like a strong foundation, and it just vibrates there, you don't care. The first level is actually applying something that's well known to solve that problem, right? So, for example, you put the foundation that rubbery, right? It allows it a little bit, so it dampens the vibrations. Mm-hmm. So, for example, right, the next step, you can't use the dampers for some reason. I don't know. It's a technological limitation, right? You can start looking in creating some other dampers, hydraulic or electromagnetic or something. So you apply the same concept, but use some newer technology to use that. So level 3, this is where we get in a little bit complex. We are trying to solve that problem using the knowledge from the neighboring fields, right? So, for example, it vibrates at a certain frequency, right? So what you can do is create vibration of the same frequency to cancel them out, So you put something that vibrates just as much, and you cancel out the amplitude of the vibrations. So you're using some nearby fields to do that. So number 4 is a radical change in the system using some completely different field, right? So for example, we are changing the way that electrogenerator works. So instead of using gasoline and the physical motion of rotation, we're using I don't know, chemical reaction to generate electricity. Or we're using magnets to move and generate the electricity. And then level 5 problems, these are the true innovation of sorts. It's where we don't even know the physics, or we don't have the science to create something new. So you develop both, first the science, and then you create the innovation. And the best example is when the scientists finally tried to develop something that was thought of in for example science fiction, right? And if you read Jules Verne's when you were a kid, you can see how much of the things that he just imagined actually exist right now, from the submarines to airplanes and a lot of other things.
Jules Verne. So is there like a favorite book of his?
Yeah, for me personally, it's The Mysterious Island.
Okay, I haven't read that one, so tell me more.
Okay, so it's just the story of a group of people who are traveling on a hot air balloon. They experience a crash and they end up stranded on an island. And it's a story about the survival. And what I love about it is the way that he presents the characters who are what you can call like a Renaissance man. They are the people who possess the knowledge in multiple different fields, and they can solve problems applying that knowledge. And this is actually very close to the definition of a true engineer for me personally.
Awesome. And then a Renaissance man, to confirm, someone who has a variety of skills, perhaps not very deep in all of them, but has a pretty good understanding of a broad perspective. And I think it's used colloquially as someone who has many different careers. Is that kind of your understanding as well?
Yeah.
Or usage?
Yeah.
Cool. And then so let's bring that back to the 5 levels of innovation or solutioning in TRIZ that we just talked about.
Yeah.
And when should we strive to apply which ones? I can see sometimes that, the hardcore nerds amongst us are jumping to try and solve it at a level 5 when maybe it requires a level 1 or 3. So what's the advice on which problems warrant which types of solutions? Or how do you think about it?
Okay, so when we approach that question, it's the easiest way to approach it is it's about resolving a contradiction. So you need to have a particular problem statement that you need to solve, right? So you don't need to overwork the idea or overcomplicate the solution. So you take your contradiction and then you go from the simplest to the most complex, step by step, until you have the contradiction resolved. So if you can solve it with the simple, level 1 or level 2 solution, apply the expertise, great. But in some cases, it's just not enough. So you need to dig deeper, and you need to really look around into the different areas, different scientific disciplines, different industries, to see how other people approach these kind of issues to have it solved.
We talked about the contradiction already. And we know, and we've talked about this many times, where it's really important, instead of jumping to the solution, that we really spent a bunch of time on the problem. And it's not always obvious of like how much is enough time. And this is the first time that I've gotten something that I think is relatively simple to use, where, hey, you solve for the problem until you can define the problem in the lens of the contradictions that make it a problem. And then, and only then, do you move on to the solutioning phase. And when you're in solutioning, these 5 levels here have been drawn out kind of in increasing levels of complexity of what's warranted. And so you go through them, levels 1 to 5, until you feel like the contradiction is satisfactorily solved. at which point you can kind of move on to the next problem. Is that fair?
Yeah, absolutely.
And then the next thing I want to talk about here is where you mentioned looking outside. And this is something that I think for myself, I've gotten to benefit from this. I assumed it's because of my ADHD, and I'm thinking about 5 different things at the same time. And so when I'm in a room, I'm able to look at, hey, how do other industries solve this? And then, the process is kind of trying to define the problem in more of a first principles way. And then so there's more inspiration that comes to us. One of my favorite ones, I haven't gotten to use personally, but I love in the design world, is biomimicry, where designers and engineers work together to look at nature for inspiration. There's billions of years of iteration that nature has had to make things as optimized as they are. And one of them was the Japanese, the Shinkansen, or the bullet train, where the original designs would be so loud when they went through a tunnel because of all that energy that was in the tunnel. And there would be a loud sonic boom when the train came out of the tunnel that all the neighboring towns and villages would be very disrupted. And then they looked to, man, I wish I could remember what bird it was, but there was a bird that would basically, it's like a kingfisher or something similar, where it's a fishing bird and it would like swoop into the water and be able to catch fish without the fish noticing because of its unique beak design that allowed for the water to not be disrupted enough where the fish could tell that the bird was coming. And then they copied that design, tried it out, and then the train was able to go in and out of the tunnel in a much more seamless way where it doesn't cause that huge explosion of sound. So that's just my tangent there, something that I got all jazzed up about. And I'm curious from your perspective, there's in our software and agile world, we talk about, this ideal sort of talent profile, this blend of generalists and specialists. And I'm curious, given your work and your background and understanding this innovation theory and also working in Agile kind of in a more modern sense, have you been able to overlap those in terms of what kind of folks tend to do really well on these teams or who you tend to hire for more?
When we talk about Agile, we all heard these concepts of I-shaped specialists, T-shaped specialists, or E-shaped specialists. So when
before you get into them,
sure.
There might be some folks who are not quite familiar with those 3 different archetypes. So let's define them first before we talk about how we solve for hiring.
So I-shaped specialists, they specialized in one vertical. So they possess an extremely deep knowledge, but in only one area. So if we apply that on theory of inventive problem solving or on TRIZ, these are the perfect candidates to solve the level 1 and level 2 problems, right? So these are the problems that are being solved by applying knowledge from that industry or from that particular field, from one project to another. These are the experts. And this is actually the majority, the overwhelming majority that we can see on the market. But they are not enough. Because if you remember, we talked about the next 3 levels. And the next 3 levels is where you start seeing the applications from other industries or from other scientific disciplines. And this is where you start needing this T-shaped specialist, so somebody who possesses knowledge deep in one field, but at least knows something in the neighboring fields. But this usually is not enough. Because in agile world or in software development, this is usually like a software developer who knows something about business analysis or a little bit about, QA, right? Or UI UX design. So they can help cross-functionality to deal with the buzz factor, but they don't bring the true diversity of knowledge into the team. And then you have this E-shaped specialist, which is like a 90-degree rotated E, where you maybe not have as deep of a knowledge in any of the particular fields, but you have a lot of knowledge in multiple different fields. And this E-shaped is as close as possible to the Renaissance man, in my understanding, because it's not just about me being able to do the business analysis, QA, and writing some code. It's actually about me being able to remember things from the encyclopedias that I read and apply something, like you mentioned, from biology to the concepts of engineering.
And I feel like I have this hunch that the E-shaped folks are going to benefit a lot in this new world of having access to a lot of expertise through AI that previously they would have to either go to the library and read a ton, which maybe their brains are not best wired for, or they'd have to, collaborate with or hire folks who have specialty, which can become a resource constraint. And now I feel like those folks have a ton of expertise of the I-shaped teammates available to them for virtually free and virtually no time. And so it can be a very great augment. So I have this hunch that the E-shaped folks are going to benefit the most from this AI world. I'm curious what reaction you have to that.
I think you are right to a certain degree, but one of the reasons why is because when people are lifelong learners or whatever you call them, people who are interested in a whole variety of things, they usually know better how to work with the information, how to validate the information, and how to define boundaries of what you want achieved well. Because when it comes to AI and its ability to act as a specialist, I can give you a great example. We did some work, and my CTO from the company was talking to the CEO of another organization, and the CEO mentioned that like now I can get the estimates from ChatGPT, and they asked like, okay, so how long does it take to develop a login form for my application? And the answer was, I think, like 3 or 4 hours, which is pretty simple, right? So the moment that the CTO stepped in and actually defined the boundaries, which kind of business it is, what is involved, what level of reliability it should have, etc., the estimate suddenly transferred from 3 to 4 hours to like 60 hours or 2 weeks or something like that. So it was a much larger number. The question was the same. The boundaries and the level of detail of what needs to be achieved was different, right? So your ability to really understand the scope and the environment that you are in, that's what's going to help you really leverage the AI to its most efficiency.
And another thing that jumps up here is this difference between accuracy and precision that comes up here. And I think a lot of the specialists that I've worked around, they tend to have this bias towards precision. And there's certainty in that. There's some level of perceived predictability in it. And this bias can sometimes cloud us from not even looking at the right problem anymore, because we look at solutions that we can measure well versus taking on some level of uncertainty, some level of error margin, just making sure that we're solving the right problem, going back to kind of the definition of the problem statement. And so it feels related to me, but I haven't fully connected it. I feel like you may have had the chance to think about the overlap of those concepts.
No, there is a huge overlap in my mind between TRIZ, agile, working with complexity, and all of that, because I think where people kind of misunderstand a lot about agile, for example, right, that it's not about lack of predictability in deliveries. It never should be. It's actually way more predictable than anything else because you have a very hard constraint as a time limit on your, for example, sprint and scrum, right? So 2 weeks, you're going to deliver. You're going to deliver the most valuable thing. So the trade-off goes on scope, not on the time, not on the budget. So when we look at the innovation the same way, right? Innovation has to be predictable because it has to give back the return on the investment. So it's a question not about how we make it better or more efficient. It's about how we make sure that we bring in return on the investment when somebody invests into the innovation. So the proper organization of a process helps you create that system that delivers the results consistently. And can there be some trade-offs at the end? Yes, and they most probably will be, right? So, but getting as close to that idealistic state as possible still brings the return on the investment, right? So, for example, if you need something extremely strong, but you don't want to increase the weight, right? So, idealistic system, you have zero weight. Yeah, maybe we will never achieve that. But looking at the materials that we are currently developing, or looking at the Formula One cars, right? They are much lighter than they used to be because of all the materials, modern materials that are used, and because of the construction, they're pretty safe. Because you see those crashes, like people survive in them, and this is amazing, right? Even the Halo, in its design that everybody hated, saved more lives by now that I can count, right? So
Sorry, what was the Halo?
Halo, it's a thing on the Formula One car. It's a little strip of protection right at the level of the pilot's head. So they didn't have it for many years. And when it was introduced, there was a lot of conversation: will it be good or will it be bad? And from FIA, the regulatory organ, they brought it in. So it got into the regulations. People started using them, and they started saving lives.
Something that we hear about a lot nowadays with taking this multifaceted approach is coming about in the AI realm, where there's energy constraints, material constraints that are becoming very real given how much more we're consuming and the projection of consumption is of artificial intelligence and the chips and the data centers and the associated resources that go into it, where I think something that the folks in Silicon Valley tend to do really well compared to innovation around technology elsewhere is that they factor in and they extrapolate innovation, bringing in things that are going to be cheaper, faster, more energy efficient, that even if the business model doesn't work today, they expect that it's going to hit some kind of inflection point. We used to say that it was factoring for Conway's law, and there's challenge and debate as to whether Conway's law is as relevant in the same way that it used to be. And I'm curious, how does that jump out to you in terms of being in the thick of software while thinking about innovating this way?
It's a great point that you're making. So right now, I think that the industry is to a point reaching the limits and actually facing that contradiction. So you can't continue adding more and more computing power, because you have to build the data centers, and then you have to rely on these data centers, and then you have to cool these data centers, and there are a whole bunch of problems that are coming with that. While when we look at the innovation from a little bit different perspective, just to give you an example, right? We had a project where we had to develop the routing for 200 vehicles for the chain of pharmacies, right? So without going into many details, it took literally about an hour of computing power at the time when we developed the system to calculate the 200 routes. So we started looking at the question: how can we reduce it? How can we change it? So instead of calculating the routes one by one, we actually applied. The best example is when you pour water into the labyrinth, it goes simultaneously in every direction. So when you apply the similar algorithmic concept, you basically calculate all the routes going out in all the directions, and then when you encounter a certain point, which is a pharmacy, you already pre-calculated the best route to reach it. So the entire calculation process went from 1 hour to 40 seconds. Right?
Wow.
The difference of the power consumption in here, it was insignificant in terms of when it's one pharmacy is running or one chain of pharmacies is running that. But if you start applying that on a global scale, the difference of application of different algorithms and different approaches, if you can speed up something by 10-fold, 20-fold, 30-fold, you have to use that much less of the computing power to achieve the same results. So I think we are prime for the era of optimization and changing the algorithms and patterns for that level of innovation, even when it comes to the AI.
That's amazing. And I think in this case, I have a hunch that whatever route optimization they were doing previously was very manual and probably took more than 1 hour for some human to do anyway,
Initially,
and would
it
have
was even
cost a
worse.
lot more. And oftentimes, I think going back to what you were saying in terms of having this cross-functional lens, we forget to tell the engineers that, hey, this is what the status quo is. If you can do better than this, and it's not going to cost a lot more to develop the solution, that's already a win. You don't have to strive for 3 decimal points of 3 nines of reliability. You don't have to strive for 3 decimal points of precision. This is like the status quo. We have to beat this. Really kind of puts into perspective, I think, something that is valuable to the business. Even as engineers, as technical folks, we may not feel entirely proud of it because we feel like there is like a more optimal way. But the business doesn't care oftentimes because you're like, hey, this is already saving me multiple hours. Just give me this raw version that I can start using today. And then if you want to, in parallel, start to make it better, that's fine. But, launch early is and faster for cheaper is enabled a lot more when that context from the other side is provided over really clearly, defined in the problem, defined in the contradiction. I love this. So, Ivan, there's a few things that we love to hear from all of our guests. And in your case, I'm going to ask you, a bonus question,
Okay.
which is, if, looking back, fictional or real, is there a favorite innovation story that you use as inspiration when you're faced with a really tough, challenging contradiction to try and solve for?
Fleming discovered penicillin.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that he said was that many scientists had seen the same things that he had seen for years before him. However, none of them had an open mind to see that the cure can come from something as disgusting as mold. And quoting him, the unprepared mind cannot see the outstretched hand of an opportunity. And I think this is a very important thing to keep in mind, is that when we focus on this culture of expertise, we are very biased in our mind towards like, I'm an expert, I know we did it 1,000 times, let's apply and do the same, etc., etc. So the true innovation rarely comes from this approach. It actually comes from being open-minded, to looking around, seeing at the other industries, bringing somebody with the expertise in another industry to help you change the things. And another story that I love from that perspective was that actually one of the hospitals, I don't remember which country it was, but one of the hospitals had an extremely high rate of post-op complications. It was way above average, or way above their standards, and they invited thousands of experts. They tried everything to fix it. They couldn't. They brought in the pit crew from Formula One to the hospital to look at the process, because these guys, they have this amazing 2-second process at the pit to do the pit stop, right? So they move like a machine. So these guys looked at what's going on and started making changes towards the process just to make it more optimized, less transactions, right? Less somebody giving something to somebody, just grab something directly, right? So they removed a lot of variance, and that significantly improved the post-op complications rate in the hospital. So this is another great example of how can you look outside to solve a problem.
And can you tell me that Fleming quote one more time? It's really profound and beautiful.
The unprepared mind cannot see the outstretched hand of an opportunity.
I love that. I recently listened to a podcast by music producer Rick Rubin, who writes a book about kind of the artist and the entrepreneur, and on I think it's called The Creative Way, the book. And he, on the episode, talks about how it's the artist's job to notice things that others pass by.
Yeah.
And then to take that observation, make it relatable, make it invoke a feeling, And so it's very, very related in terms of innovation and art, I think. And
It is.
then you take that feeling, and then there's solutions that come on the other side of it too. Similarly, it's that can overlap. So another thing that we love talking about on the show is around how to enable our talent and organize our folks. And we got to talk about the different profiles or archetypes of I shape, T shape, E shape. And I'm curious, when you are deploying a new team for a new software product, is there a North Star of a team that you find ideal? This could be fictional or, a real life team, maybe even one that you've been on.
Yeah, there is, and it's not even one team. In my life, I was fortunate enough to be on multiple different, what you call, high performing teams, and the culture in every one of them and the composition in every one of them was slightly different, but what they all had in common is that level of degree of care for one another, and yet a level of brutal honesty that we had towards one another. And I think these are the two driving factors, right? So when you gather people who are curious, who are very interested in multiple different things, who possess the knowledge in multiple different areas, and then you create that atmosphere where people care about each other, it creates some absolutely amazing results. And when I say care, like, there was a funny story. I was working, it was my early days, crazy hours. I was in QA, so me and my friend and colleague, we are working working the night shift on the release, and the office building is closed. There is no way to get the food or something. And then 2 a.m, I hear the knock on the window, and we were the office was on the first floor. So I'm like opening the window, and another colleague of mine stands there with food. And she was just like, yeah, I thought you guys were gonna be hungry. So she lived a few blocks away. So she actually walked 2 a.m. She cooked something. She walked 2 a.m, gave us the food. We ate 6 a.m. The shift changed. We went away. But I think these little things show that it goes beyond just doing your tasks at work in order to be really successful. And yet the fights that we had with that same person at work, trying to get our process better, trying to get the product better, they were brutal, right? So we were, again, very honest to each other. Everything that everyone misses was put out front, and you couldn't get away from it. And that actually drove us forward way more than anything else.
I love that. I think I've heard the phrase "candor is kindness" many
Yeah.
times, and it might even tie back to the problem definition that we talked about before. When it makes it really clear what problem we're trying to solve here, what contradiction we're trying to solve for, then we're not solving for the people anymore. It's very clear what the higher calling we have here is in terms of what good looks like. And it's not the self-protection that comes with avoiding hard truths. It puts into perspective that what's more important than a little bit of conflict between you and I here is that we solve this contradiction that we have on the whiteboard. And just another reinforcement for everyone listening that stating the problem out loud and clearly is got a bunch of benefits. And then the last thing we like to hear from our guests is we're nerds about building really delightful products or crafting really delightful experiences. And if you think back to recently, was there a product that you unboxed or an experience that you had that you found particularly delightful, where you felt like, wow, the folks behind this, they just don't get it done. They actually get it.
The last time I had that feeling was when I bought a new phone, surprisingly. And this wasn't an Apple phone or Samsung phone. It was OnePlus.
Mm-hmm.
So I bought OnePlus Open and a couple of years back, and it came and I started using it. And to this day, I am still excited to pick it up every single time. Like, the level of everything they had in there, went above and beyond what you would expect. And for the cost that I purchased it at, it was like 50% cheaper than any of the competitors, right? So it was such an exciting purchase that I love. And their tagline is "A business never settle." And I think when I pick it up every time I look at it and I start using it, it's like they didn't settle on anything when they created that particular model.
Man, I love that. And talk about contradictions. I remember it was over maybe 10 years ago that the first one came out. My brother got it. And I remember the unboxing day. I happened to be next
Yeah.
to him. And it was really mind blowing what this sort of startup company was able to do, uh, making an unboxing experience that was even more fun than opening up an iPhone, which is like a very, very high bar.
Yeah.
So I love that. I will make sure to have a link to the latest ones in the show notes. And speaking of Ivan, I'm sure there are folks out there who might be curious about uh, contacting yourself to have more of this conversation, maybe exploring collaborating with your team on building some technology and creating some innovation together. What's the best way for folks to get a hold of you and your team?
So the easiest way, you can always find me on LinkedIn, IvanGekht, Ivan Gekht, and just connect, send me a message. Also, our company profile, Gehtsoft, GEHTSOFT on LinkedIn. Feel free to contact us or through the website, GetsoftUSA.com.
Cool. And we'll make sure to have links to all of that in the show notes as well.
Thank you.
Well, hey, man, this was super, super fun nerding out with you on these concepts. My mind is blown, and I don't think I've still fully understood a lot of it. So I look forward to even hearing this another time. Thanks so much for making time here.
Absolutely. My pleasure. Thank you for having me over today.
Hope you enjoyed that conversation with Ivan Gekht. I think there's a ton of things that I'm going to incorporate myself into my own work, as well as into the workshops and the office hours that we bring to our business owner customers and their boards. The first one is around problem framing. If you've listened to the show before, you've heard us talk about not falling in love with the solution and instead falling in love with the problem. The challenge with that definition, I think, compared to what we've learned, is that there isn't a minimum effective dose of what falling in love with the problem is. And Ivan is giving me that. Going forward, I'm going to fall in love with the problem until I feel pretty confident about being able to frame the problem as a contradiction. Framing it as a contradiction, then, like he talked about, then allows us to have something to solve. It gives us a definition of when it's solved. As well, it gives us good framing on making a decision of which stage of innovation that we talked about that is worth applying to this. So let's try and remember the various stages that he talked about. So stage one is applying known solutions. This is maybe in your business where you're hiring more specialists, you're adding a tool, and maybe you're copying something that exists in your industry from your competitors. It solves a lot of problems cheaply until the context changes. Level two is improving with variation and optimization. This is where maybe you're going to hire better specialists. You're going to add better, higher performing materials. You're going to add better infrastructure so things can be more reliable or things can be faster. The third one that I loved was about borrowing from adjacent domains. If you're able to frame the problem in somewhat of a generic way outside of your specific industry, you don't have to borrow just from your own competitors. You get to borrow from other innovators in other industries that solved similar problems. One of the ones that you've certainly heard about on the show is around lean product management and agile software delivery, whose principles are ultimately rooted in lean manufacturing, and a lot of it borrowed from the Toyota production system. So it's not surprising that I love a lot of the stories that have come out of Toyota. I think this is where this theory of inventive problem solving starts to outperform traditional brainstorming and optimization that teams tend to do. The next one is changing the system architecture. This is where you start to eliminate things like handoffs and approvals, like we talked about at the start of the show, where Toyota's Andon system eliminated an aspect of the manager or approver or quality control system by delegating it to the operators who are at the best position to eliminate the quality issues before they even occur. And then finally, it's creating a new principle or field. This is where antibiotics or invention of human flight came about. And I think it's relevant today around business owners because artificial intelligence is going to enable new business models in your industry. And it's a time at which I think we're going to see a lot of disruption happening because of this new tool that's come available. And I think the business owners who are able to frame the problems that they solve for their customers the best way and zoom out, learn from others, are going to be in the best position to harness AI well beyond just performance, but for strategy and ultimately changing the industry by thinking about things this way. If you're looking for a soundboard on how to frame your ideas as contradictions or see where you apply the different levels of innovation proportional to the problem you're trying to solve, hit us up for an office hours conversation. Usually 30 to 45 minutes is plenty to make a ton of progress because we are very intentional about how we facilitate it. People often talk about it being like one of the most cognitively intense hours of their day, but feel a ton of clarity and confidence enough to be creative around a problem they're trying to solve and leave with focus on what the most important priorities that they need to do next are, chasing after an opportunity. You can find us at office hours at convergence.fm, and someone will be in touch to schedule time, and we can go from there. Look forward to hearing from you there. Otherwise, we'll be back next week with another episode of convergence.fm, and we'll see you there. Thank you for joining me on the Convergence podcast today. Subscribe to the Convergence podcast on Apple Podcast, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your content. If you're listening and found this helpful, please give us a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube, hit that like button and tell me what you think about what you heard today.